Hey guys, and welcome back to another video on my channel. Today we are back with another Freaky Friday video, and today I am very excited for this one because this is a video that I've been planning to do for quite a while, but it isn't really a mystery, so I didn't want to post it on Monday just because I know that you guys look forward to the Mystery Monday kind of stuff. And so now that these Freaky Friday things have kind of started up again, I'm really excited to get into this case. Barney Hill was an African-American man who was born in 1922. He was the youngest child in his family, and in his adult life he enlisted in the army and served for his country before being honorably discharged. At this time, Barney started to attend university at Temple University, where he met a woman by the name of Ruby. They got married and ended up having 2 children before going on to get a divorce. After getting a divorce from Ruby, that is when Barney met a woman by the name of Eunice Elizabeth Barrett, who was better known to family and friends and now is known worldwide as Betty. Betty was born in 1919, and she was, at the time when she met Barney, as well as for the rest of her adult life, a social worker and had a degree in social sciences. Pretty much immediately after meeting, the couple became absolutely infatuated with each other. They were head over heels in love, and they would eventually go on to be married, and now they are known as Betty and Barney Hill. In September of 1961, both Betty and Barney somehow managed to get time off of work at the same time, so the couple had decided to take a trip to Canada. On September 16th, 1961, the couple had made a brief stop in New Hampshire on their way home from Canada. The couple was driving down Route 3 and approaching an area that is known as Indian Head, and that is when they noticed a strange light in the sky that appeared to be following their vehicle. After noticing this strange light in the sky, the couple pulled over and Barney got out of the car to observe what he thought was a strange star with a pair of binoculars. Suddenly, the couple had been 33 miles into their drive home, and they had hours that were absolutely unaccounted for. It had actually taken them 7 hours to drive a 190-mile drive, which would normally only take about 2 hours. When they did finally arrive back to their home, both Betty and Barney said that they were having a really unsettling feeling. And I think this is fairly normal, especially since they are missing such a large lump sum of time. I think that would just make absolutely anybody really unsettled. And just to add to their worries, after arriving home, they noticed that the dress that Betty had been wearing had been torn, and she was also missing a set of blue earrings that she had been wearing on the drive home. As well as that, Barney's shoes were really scuffed up, and both of their watches had completely stopped working. Both Betty and Barney both said that they also felt extremely dirty, and despite the fact that it was 5 a.m. when they arrived home, they both insisted on having a shower. Now, the couple did talk about how they were feeling, but neither of them could come to a conclusion of what exactly they thought had happened. When Betty woke up on the 20th in the afternoon because they had gone to bed so late, she called her sister to tell her about the strange events that had happened the night before. And that is when her sister told her that she needed to tell somebody about the events that had taken place. That's when Betty had made the decision to call a close family friend by the name of Major Paul Henderson, and he worked at a nearby Air Force base. I think it's called the Pease Air Force Base. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's what it's called. And she had told him about the strange light that she seen in the sky before all of this strange stuff started happening, and then she told him what happened to her and Barney. Something that I just want to mention before we move deeper into this case, because I personally think this is very interesting, and I do think that it is a key factor in this case, but at this time, this sighting from Barney and Betty Hill is actually known as the first alien abduction ever reported. This was not something that was a common occurrence. People really didn't speak about it a lot back then, and people did see UFOs quite often, but they hadn't connected them to aliens. So that is just something to keep in mind while we go through this case. After Betty had reported to Major Henderson what she believed had happened, he had actually started to look into other UFO sightings from the same day. And that is when he started to look at the Air Force Base's data entry, and that is when he found that there had actually been 2 other UFO sightings from 2 completely separate Air Force bases. And all 3 of these UFO sightings still remain in the Project Blue Book's database still to this day. Project Blue Books was one of the series of somatic studies of UFOs by American Air Force bases that started in 1952, for those of you who may not know. But I think I talked about them in a previous video, maybe one of my Halloween videos, I can't really remember, but I do vaguely remember speaking about them briefly. After this encounter, Betty Hill started to have horrifying nightmares. And in these nightmares, she recounted that these dreams were about her and Barney driving down the road when all of a sudden they were stopped by some sort of spacecraft. And these little strange creatures got off this spacecraft and brought her and Barney onto their ship and started to do painful experiments on them. But that experience didn't just affect Betty. Barney was really withdrawn after having this experience. It is said in some articles that he took up drinking again, so I'm not sure if that means that he had a drinking problem in the past or what, but it is stated that after this experience he did just start drinking quite frequently, and his health started to really decline. Also, strangely, after this encounter, Barney started to develop a strange ring of warts around his genitals that nobody could really tell him where they came from, but it took 2 surgeries to completely remove them from his body. Barney also developed an ulcer after this experience with Betty driving in the car had taken place, and he was so absolutely traumatized by their experience that he had no other choice but to start going to therapy. Shortly after Barney started to go to therapy, Betty decided that this was a very good idea and that she should start going as well, so the couple went to therapy for quite a while before they were offered hypnosis therapy, which Barney really was against at first, but he eventually came around. He eventually came out and said that the reason that he had originally declined the hypnosis therapy is because he was scared of finding out for sure what had happened that evening while the couple had been driving home. Betty and Barney would undergo hypnosis therapy over the span of 3 months, and their sessions were both separate, so they weren't in the same room. And after each session, the doctor would induce amnesia so that the couple couldn't speak about what they remembered, and they couldn't tell anybody what had happened. The doctors would review the couple's therapy sessions after each session, and by the end of the 3 months, they were able to put together a clear picture of what exactly happened in the early hours of September 20th, 1961. The doctor would then call in Betty and Barney Hill and play for them their tapes that had been going on throughout their hypnosis. So after they combined all of their hypnosis videos, they played them back to the couple. And that is when they found out about the horrific events that had taken place that evening while they were driving home from their vacation. Now I'm going to be talking first and more about Betty's encounter just because she has been more openly spoken about this. She's been really open about it with the public and she talks about it quite often, whereas Barney's encounter was really kept to himself and he was a bit more closed off, so I'm going to touch base briefly on his. But from now on, this is going to be more focused on Betty just for a short period of time before I speak very briefly about Barney. So as we already know at this point, the couple had been driving home from their vacation in Montreal, Canada, when they noticed a strange light following their vehicle, and they pulled over to the side of the road and Barney got out of the vehicle to try and get a better look at this light. Now, according to Betty's account, as they got out of the vehicle, they noticed that this light just kept getting closer and closer to their car. And that is when they started to be able to make out that this wasn't a light, but it was a disc-shaped ship. The ship had red lights on it, and Betty said that she could make out figures of some kind of creature standing in what appeared to be a window on the front of the ship. Barney then jumped back into the vehicle and told Betty that these creatures had planned on capturing them and that they needed to flee the area. The couple did try and flee the scene, but these creatures had covered the road so that they couldn't pass, and just after this, the car's motor completely stopped working. That is when these creatures came up to the car doors and removed the couple from their vehicle. Betty described these creatures as being short with what appeared to be smooth gray skin and huge black eyes, and this sounds quite similar to what is now referred to as the Greys. These creatures took Betty and Barney onto their ship and put them both into 2 separate rooms. And this is when Betty met who she would refer to as the leader of the group. And the reason that she referred to this one as the leader is because he is the only one that could speak English. And despite the fact that there was 9 other beings in the room, he seemed to be giving the other beings direction. He seemed to be telling them what to do and how to perform these experiments that they would be later performing on both Betty and Barney Hill. This is when these creatures started to check Betty's throat, ears, eyes, just the normal stuff that they check when you go to the doctor, and they also took samples of her skin and her hair. She also said that her body was touched by little points on a wire and that the leader had told her that they were checking her nervous system. Now this next part is very odd, but after checking all of Betty's body and her vitals and things like that, they then attempted to put a needle into her belly button. Betty really fought against this and she didn't want them to do it at all, so this was stopped for a brief period where the leader had asked her why she wasn't letting them do this, and that is when Betty told him that she was scared it was going to hurt. The leader had promised Betty that this wouldn't be painful at all, and after they started to put the needle into Betty's belly button, she said that she started to feel a little bit of pain, and that is when the leader put his hands on her head and all signs of pain completely vanished and the experience was ultimately painless. Betty then asked the leader what exactly this was, and they told her that this was a pregnancy test. Now in 1961, a pregnancy test like this hadn't even been invented yet. Although it did come out a few years later, a pregnancy test like this was invented a couple years later and released to the public, but that just goes to show that aliens do have advanced technology. At this point, one of the other creatures had rushed into the room and started tugging at Betty's teeth. And that is when the leader told her that they were confused because her teeth didn't come out but Barney's did, and that is because Barney actually had dentures. After Betty's examination, she was able to speak to the leader of the ship, and she asked him where he was from, and he showed Betty a star map, and she said that this map appeared as if she was looking out a window. It was really three-dimensional, and it was about 3 to 4 feet long and about 2 feet high. Betty said that this map was covered in balls of light and lines, and the leader had told her that the thick lines were places that they traveled often and the broken lines were to show of expeditions. Betty memorized this map and actually recreated it later on. She showed that Zeta Reticulus as the aliens' home planet, and this is also believed to now be the home of the Greys, which is very odd. I mean, if you do believe in aliens and you believe in the Greys and things like that, then I guess it isn't too odd, but if you're coming at this to the point of view that this is a made-up story, then that would seem like something really strange. Betty and Barney had been returned to their vehicle around 2 a.m. on September 20th, 1961. She said that after they got into their vehicle, they had watched the ship kind of take off and it was surrounded by fire with the disc being in the center. Another thing that I want to mention is one of the bases that had actually been tracking the UFO had tracked that the UFO had been spotted at 2:14 a.m., which would line up with the timeline of when Betty and Barney had been returned back to their vehicle. Now, although the couple's experiences do go hand in hand with one another, they both had very, very different experiences. And I'm going to link Barney's hypnosis video down below because if this video interests you, then I highly, highly recommend that you go give those a listen because they are very, very interesting. Barney had actually described these beings as looking very similar to humans, and he said that they were wearing uniforms that resembled that of the Nazis, which were slick and black, and he'd even reported that one of these aliens had been wearing a scarf. And this isn't something that has ever been reported since in an alien abduction. Nobody has ever reported that an alien has been wearing a scarf. He also said that these beings had small slanted black eyes and communicated telepathically. Now, just going back here, Betty said that these beings had huge black eyes and that the one leader had spoken to her in English. Some people have said that they believe that Barney Hill had been experiencing something a little bit different, and they chalk this up to his PTSD from the war. But both Betty and Barney Hill have undergone a lot of hypnosis. They have been looked at very closely by doctors, and all of the doctors that have examined the couple say that both of them endured something very, very traumatic on that evening. Something that stood out to me is how strange it is that Betty, of course her experience was traumatizing, but it definitely seemed more pleasant, whereas Barney's experience seemed absolutely horrifying. It seemed like one of the most unpleasant things you could ever encounter. It seemed just absolutely awful, whereas Betty kind of seemed like she was at peace with what was going on. That, of course, could just be chalked up to the fact that everybody handles things differently, but again, to me, it just seemed a little bit odd. The abduction of Betty and Barney Hill was actually the first alien abduction that was reported publicly. And the abduction of Betty and Barney Hill is actually now known as the original alien abduction, and it is also known as the Zeta Reticulus alien abduction. I strongly believe this story, and I strongly believe that Betty and Barney Hill were abducted by aliens. And the reason for this, because I'm always skeptical about these kinds of things, but I strongly, strongly believe that in this case they were telling the truth, is because, again, this is the first reported alien abduction, so they really didn't have anything to go off of. And the strange thing to me about this is they had a lot of things that are common occurrences in alien abductions today, which include lost time, and then when they were being hypnotized. They remembered what they looked like, and Betty had said that they looked very similar to what people now describe as the Greys. Just a lot of this stuff goes hand in hand with now many other reported alien abductions. On top of that, the couple had absolutely no reason to make something like this up. Why would anybody want to be known as the people who got abducted by aliens or want to be criticized by everybody? They had no reason to come up with this story, and then they didn't know they would get famous from it. They had no idea, so they really didn't have any purpose or really wouldn't have benefited by making up this story. In February of 1961, just 7.5 years after the alleged alien abduction, Barney Hill suffered from cerebral hemorrhaging and passed away at the young age of 46. Betty Hill would never remarry because she said that the love that her and Barney had was something that was irreplaceable. But she did remain an activist in the extraterrestrial community up until 2004, when she sadly passed away due to cancer. But guys, that brings us to the end of this video. If you like this video, please give it a big thumbs up. Don't forget to comment down below what you'd like to see in my future videos, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on that notification bell so that you don't miss any future videos from me. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye guys!